Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
On today's pod, I talked to Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, the host of Crooked Media's America Dissected, which is our twice-a-week in-depth podcast about the coronavirus from the perspective of public health officials and medical experts. But first, Dan and I will dive into the latest developments around the government's response to the pandemic, from the White House to Congress. Also, please check out this week's excellent Pod Save the World, where Tommy and Ben explain South Korea's more successful coronavirus response, how Donald Trump was warned a crisis like this was coming by the Obama administration, and what a competent government response would actually look like. It's a really great episode. Tommy and Ben did a great job, so check it out. For those of you who have been looking for a way to help people who are hurting the most during this incredibly difficult time, Crooked Media put together a coronavirus relief fund that will split your donation equally to groups providing critical support to food banks, healthcare workers, restaurant workers, seniors, kids who depend on school lunches, and others. You can donate at crooked.com/coronavirus. We also want to thank everyone who left us voicemails in response to us asking how coronavirus and social distancing has impacted you. We will be sharing some of those voicemails throughout today's pod. And if you'd like to leave one, give us a call at 323-405-9944. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for the voicemails, and keep them coming. And finally, an update on touring for Lovett or Leave It and Pod Save America. We have to cancel all live shows from March through May. This sucks. We're all sad about it, but obviously it is way more important for everyone to stay healthy. Full refunds will be available at the point of purchase. Ticket holders will receive an email from the ticket provider with further instructions, and we really hope to reschedule once this nightmare is behind us. So, Dan, let's talk about where we are, huh?
Where are we, John? Where are we?
I don't know.
I know where I am. I'm in my house where I've been for a week now.
Yes, you are part of the shelter-in-place, 7 million people in Northern California, I believe, that are sheltering in place?
Yeah, it's what everyone should be doing.
How's that going?
It's good. Given all things, I have a lot of time on my hands, but it's the right thing to do, and
yeah.
I am grateful that where California and where we live in California is taking the overall majority of people taking it very seriously and doing what needs to be done, and that's ultimately the right thing. And I would love it if other places around the country were following the lead that Governor Newsom and the county officials where I live who put this into effect would do.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. So you and I separately were just watching this crazy fucking press conference by Donald Trump, which is something you could say about every press conference he's given since, 2015, earlier. But there are a lot of lies there, as usual. There's a lot of, vitriol, as usual. But I do want to sort of start with a story from Reuters that I think sums up where we are right now and why. This was a story that ran yesterday. So on January 20th, the United States and South Korea both confirmed their first cases of coronavirus. Both countries, same day, confirmed the first case. South Korea responded with a massive, immediate, nationwide effort to fight the pandemic. And as of yesterday, they've tested nearly 300,000 people. And as a result, the number of new infections in South Korea have been declining over the last few weeks. In the United States, where we have 6 times the population of South Korea, we have tested only 25,000 people, and the number of new infections are growing exponentially every single day. We're now well past 8,000 cases and 100 dead. We've got doctors and healthcare workers begging for more hospital beds and masks and ventilators. The economy is at a standstill. Schools are closed. Millions of people might not be able to leave their homes, go to their jobs, or open their businesses for months. We've already seen a spike in unemployment claims. And in the midst of all of this, Donald Trump gave himself a 10 out of 10 on his response to the crisis. What do you think, Dan? Would you be more in the 8 or 9 range, or what would you give him?
Is 0 an option?
Zero is an option in this exercise. I mean, how did we, before we get to sort of the economic fallout and the response in Congress, How did we fall so far behind countries like South Korea, and why isn't this sort of the biggest story?
I mean, it's hard for something to be the biggest story right now because of there's only there's 1,000 aspects to the one story that is dominating the country.
Yes.
But, there were some really important stories in the Wall Street Journal overnight, which I think get to the bottom of what is happening here. The problem we have is, even though the Trump administration was warned repeatedly about this, that President Obama and Obama's administration said that this was the thing that kept them up at night, that Trump, not only did he ignore those warnings and not prepare for this, he took steps to actively ensure America was less prepared by firing the Global Pandemic Response Unit within the White House National Security Council, and then downplayed the warnings of everyone once the coronavirus hit the United States, and has left us woefully unprepared. If we had followed South Korea's path, which was wholly available to us, then we would be in a vastly different situation, both in terms of public health and the economy. And we wouldn't have the vast majority of Americans being told not to leave their home for weeks at a time. Yeah. And it really boils down to, I think, what is this unique element of Trump's presidency, which is this combination of incompetence and narcissism. Incompetence in the sense that he is not dialed into the facts of what is happening in America enough to think ahead of anything more than a news cycle, and the fact that he was so concerned early on this process about the idea that more testing would lead to more news stories about people having coronavirus, and he wanted to downplay it. And so we missed the opportunity to expedite and expand testing in a way that would ensure that we knew who had the disease. And the fact that we cannot do the testing is why everyone is social distancing and quarantining in place and shelter in their home or whatever. But it's also just a simple fact that there are people walking around with coronavirus who have no idea.
Yeah.
And therefore giving it to other people. And then you have essential personnel, medical professionals, members of Congress, a group I don't often call essential personnel, but they are in this case, who can't get tested and therefore are being removed from the process, right? There are medical, much needed doctors and nurses who have come in contact with a coronavirus patient and maybe showing some symptoms of something. But because they can't get a test, they have to leave the hospital for 14 days. And it puts us in this tremendous shortage. And this Wall Street Journal story said that there were three failures that all happened that led to led to where we are on testing. One is the fact that the CDC insisted on creating their own test and then screwed it up. The second is a refusal to expand the criteria of how to use commercial and private tests early, and which limited the availability of tests to states and hospitals. And then the last thing was not reaching out to the commercial labs and the private companies that make these tests to warn them about what was coming, to ask them prepare, because even once we got more tests, we were still short on the swabs you need to administer the test and the reagents you need to process the tests. And if we had started preparing when we first had warnings that this might happen, then we would have had the capacity to test potentially millions of Americans and dramatically reduce the public health and the economic consequences for the country.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that it's not just a failure in the past, but it continues to be a failure even as we're seeing testing being ramped up all over the country. It's still not keeping up with the need by any stretch. And if you look at country, a lot of people, and Tommy and Ben cover this on Pod Save the World, and I talked to Abdul about this as well. Some people are saying, oh, well, China was able to contain this better because they're an authoritarian government. South Korea is a democracy. Germany is a democracy. There are other countries who took this seriously earlier and are taking this more seriously now that are implementing mass testing. And as a result, not only will they have fewer infections, but they may not have to implement as drastic social distancing measures that not only keep people at home, but keep the economy at a standstill, like us, like we are right now, and that we will have to do for some time probably. So I think, as we watch these press conferences and all this happy talk and all these promises come out of the Trump administration every day that turn out to then not be true or turn out to be exaggerated, I continue to, and we'll talk about sort of the press and the politics of it later, but I continue to believe that the most important questions that should be asked at these briefings are about the testing, because it does seem like the way out of the tough choice between our health and our economy is some kind of a mass testing program that is ramped up as quickly as possible, and it's clear that we are not there yet. So let's talk about the economic response. On Wednesday night, Trump signed the House's Family First agenda into law, a coronavirus relief bill that passed the Senate 90-8 and provides free testing for everyone, 2 weeks of emergency paid leave for government employees and employees at companies with up to 500 employees, 10 weeks of paid childcare leave, $1 billion in food assistance to students, seniors, the poor, and food banks, and $1 billion in unemployment insurance support. That is just the beginning. The White House and Congress are now working on an even bigger coronavirus relief bill that will be at least $1 trillion. The administration has embraced a Democratic policy of direct cash payments to Americans. They want to send people a check in April and another in May. The amount will depend on family size and income. They also want to provide $300 billion in loans to small businesses, $50 billion in loans to the airline industry, and $150 billion in loans for other distressed sectors of the economy. Dan, what do you think of a Republican president and Republicans in Congress suddenly embracing a $1 trillion stimulus package? And do you think it's enough?
It's almost certainly not enough. This is unlike anything the U.S. economy has faced since at least the Great Depression. Yeah. Which is, you think about 9/11, you think about financial crisis, restaurants were open within a day of 9/11. The impacted industries around 9/11 was primarily the airlines, when no one could fly because they had to be shut down for a while. During the financial crisis, everything else was open. Obviously, there was a shortage in demand because people had less money, but businesses were still open. Everything is closed.
Yeah.
And I have heard from several people in my life in the last 24 hours who have been laid off from their jobs because, they work in the food and beverage industry or construction or anything else that is completely shut down. And these businesses have no margin to be able to pay people these businesses do not have the margins where they can not receive revenue and continue to pay their employees. And this is really an economic situation unlike anything we have ever seen. The projections on GDP in the second quarter are dramatically worse than they were in the worst parts of the 2008 financial crisis.
Which, having been there, both of us, were absolutely terrifying every single day of the end of the 2008 campaign and the beginning of the Obama administration in 2009. And the sort of outlook that Barack Obama's economic advisors offered him every day was terrifying. And they were talking about sort of Great Depression style scenarios. And I think a lot of us back then thought, well, it really can't get worse than this. And it seems right now that it is worse than that.
It is. It cannot imagine it isn't. And this, for some businesses, there will be, whenever this comes to an end, there will be a snapback, right? Where, people who were going to purchase cars or do other things that they would ordinarily do but can't do in this quarter will do in the quarter where people get back. But for huge majorities of Americans, they are going to be in a hole that $1,000 check, a $2,500 check, a $4,500 check is not going to help them if they cannot work for months at a time. And even if they're allowed to delay tax payments or have evictions being suspended like they are in a number of municipalities and states in the country, how you get out of that hole is, many of these businesses will not survive. And it's going to take the $1 trillion number is a very, very large number, and people keep comparing it to the $800 billion or so that was in the Economic Recovery Act that Obama passed. But people forget that the Economic Recovery Act was like the fourth or fifth piece of legislation that was put in place to deal with that crisis and that recession. And this is just one. There's going to be a lot more that has to be done just to protect American workers and families from financial ruin who are struggling to get by anyway.
Yeah, I think the key thing here is the timeline on this, in that if we knew this was going to be like this for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, then you could start putting a number on sort of the relief package that would be necessary to help people. The problem is, you have like this Imperial College report out that sort of rightly scared the shit out of the Trump administration and Boris Johnson and other world leaders that's talking about, social distancing measures like this and shutdowns like this for 12 to 18 months until a vaccine is developed. I mean, if large sectors, most sectors of the economy, not just the United States economy, but the global economy are shut down for 12 to 18 months, you're absolutely right that $1 trillion is going to look like a drop in the bucket for most people who just don't have an income and are forced to stay home. I mean, it is very, very scary. And so I think, I think the first reaction to a bunch of conservative Republicans saying, yeah, no, we're for direct relief is, wow, look at the Republicans came around. The fact that they're coming around, I think, shows that they're looking at some of these projections, and coming around to like $1,000 a month is not a big fucking deal. When, as you point out, $1,000, like two checks for $1,000 each, or $2,000 each, or even $4,000 each, like some of them are saying, that's not going to be nearly enough not even close to enough, if this thing lasts, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, or 12 to 18 months. It's really fucking scary.
Yeah, this is a number that's based on what seems to be the overly optimistic projections of not just Trump, but also a lot of people in the financial sector. Like, you see these economic projections for the rest of the year, and they're projecting this giant bounce back in the economy in Q3. And yes, that is possible, I assume, if this is something that fades soon, but there's no reason to expect that. And we should be preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, which is the exact opposite of how the Trump administration has approached this, which is why we're in this fucking mess to begin with.
Yeah. So what should Democrats fight for in this bill, and how hard should they fight for it? I know you offered some ideas in a memo yesterday that everyone can find on crooked.com as part of your shelter at home extra time. You're now churning out very good memos, so I mean everyone can benefit from that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, as I said to you after I wrote this thing, that basically I'm writing unsolicited campaign memos for the same reason that people in solitary confinement do push-ups, to keep from going insane. And so, look, if you're a candidate or an organization out there, I got time. Hit me up.
Careful.
The advice will be worth what you're paying for it, which is zero.
That's right. It's free advice. Free advice.
But yeah, free advice. But like, I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last few days, as we've all had so much time, about how Democrats handle this, because we know how Republicans would handle it in a similar situation, which would be if there was a massive economic tumult 6 months before Barack Obama's reelection. Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan's approach to this would have been tough luck.
Yeah.
Because they know that there's a strong correlation between the strength of the economy and the reelection prospects of the incumbent president. So there would be no incentive for them to do anything to help. And you say, God, that's so callous and partisan. How can you say that? Well, I'll tell you why I can say it, because I know it to be true, because that was the exact approach that Mitch McConnell and the House Republicans took, not 7 months before Barack Obama's reelection, but 2 months after his election, and where they basically decided that the best way to take back power in the 2010 elections was to hurt as many American workers as possible and blame Obama. So that's what will be happening now. That is not a strategy available to Democrats, because we like to be able to wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, and we want to help people. And that is a fundamental difference between the parties. And our voters would hold us accountable for that level of cynicism. And so how do we do this how do we sort of navigate these politics without letting Trump off the hook for what he did? And I think in the context of the debate, I would say the 3 pieces of advice I give to Democrats are: 1, we have to offer an alternative. We have to let them know what a bigger, bolder, more progressive, more populist approach would look like. And you're seeing some of that already. There's an approach in the House from Maxine Waters, and then one in the Senate about using this bill to cancel student loan debt. There is a bill from friend of the pod Sherrod Brown and Cory Booker and Michael Bennet and others that is about a $4,500 check to voters, which is a much larger sum. There are a number of recommendations put forward by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren about the sort of pro-worker strings that should be put on any of these corporate rescue packages. None of the money can be used for buybacks. Elizabeth Warren had an idea that if you accept the money, you have to put a worker on your board. Sort of those sorts of things. So we have to put forward an alternative. The second thing is Democrats have to recognize that we have a lot of leverage here.
All the leverage.
Because Trump and McConnell, who's trying to hold on the Senate, need this more than politically. right? Put aside the economics, the patriotism, the morality. They need this politically more than anything else in the world. And this is a thing we know from having worked in the Obama administration during a previous financial crisis, is that the public holds the president and his party accountable for what happens and what doesn't happen. And so inaction is something that hurts them. And so we have to, and Trump and McConnell know that, which is why they are coming here with $1 trillion package, and they are pretty thirsty for this. And so Democrats should use that to get what they can. And so the last part of the advice is, the point of our advocacy should show the difference between the two parties, right? That we are fighting for workers and struggling families, and they are fighting for corporations. So that's why we have to be pushing for bans on stock buybacks and ensuring the money goes to workers and those sorts of things, and highlight those differences. And you have to find, we need to do the right thing for people, right? And we need to be seen as reasonable in trying to accomplish something, because we are reasonable and we are trying to accomplish something. But that doesn't mean that we have to sort of concede everything to the Republicans. And I think I saw Senator Schumer on CNN last night, and he was saying all the right things on this. And so, at least at the outset, I think the Democratic mentality is headed in the right direction, even if there were some significant bumps in the road in that first House bill that you guys talked about on Monday.
Yeah, I think the main lesson that I took away from how we handled the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009 is propose what you believe is needed, not what you believe can pass. And there were reasons that we had to propose what we believed could pass back in 2009, and those reasons were what you just laid out, which is the Republicans didn't want to help us anyway, and so they weren't going to give us the votes. And so we had to figure out a way to get it through Congress because we were in charge. But as you point out, Democrats have the leverage now. Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell need Nancy Pelosi to pass something through the House. They need 60 votes in the Senate, which means that Mitch McConnell needs help from Chuck Schumer. And so I think that Democrats have to propose the most ambitious package that they believe will solve the problem. And, you laid out some of the ideas that have been people have been kicking around. I do think making these direct payments to people, I do believe that making sure that these direct payments to people aren't one-time payments, that they happen monthly, is a good idea, or at least every few months, or at least that they continue and it's not just a one-time thing, because I do think that the further we get into this, the harder politically it's going to be to continue having Congress pass these big relief packages. And I also, and Brian Beutler also wrote a piece on Crooked about what Democrats should do, and you all should go check that out. But Brian has a good idea, which is, look, if we get to November and, Joe Biden is the next, wins the presidency and he's the next president, we know what will happen, which is Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy in Congress will refuse. Well, suddenly they won't like relief packages anymore. Suddenly they won't like direct cash payments anymore, and they will try to strangle Joe Biden's presidency, and they won't care if they bring the economy down. And so there should be sort of automatic triggers here where, as long as GDP is under a certain amount, as long as unemployment is at a certain amount, direct cash payments to Americans and other relief measures continue automatically, so that we don't have to continue going back and having to pass new packages out of Congress. So I do think that's a good idea. I think we'll need bigger cash payments. I mean, Bernie Sanders suggested, $2,000 a month, and then also that Medicare should expand to cover all coronavirus-related healthcare costs. I think that's a good idea. There's also this was good, a proposal floating around, and I think it's been embraced by even some center-right economists and, some people in the White House, for $1 trillion to small businesses to help cover 12 weeks of missed revenue, though it might have to go much longer than that. And the government will pay off those loans so long as the companies that get them don't lay off workers. So there's an incentive there to keep people employed. I think that's good. You talked about restrictions on CEO compensation and stock buybacks for any company that gets help. Everyone from AOC to Elizabeth Warren to Chuck Schumer has been talking about that on the Democratic side, so that's good as well. So yeah, I do think, but again, no matter what we go, and we talked about student debt cancellation as well. Elizabeth Warren's been pushing that, so there are a lot of good ideas out there on the Democratic side. I think the key is going to be to hold the line here, and realize that the Republicans need Democrats to pass this. And like you said, make sure that people know there's a difference between the parties and who we're fighting for. One other area that we've been talking about that Congress needs to do something on is voting in November and elections. And there's been a big push. There was legislation by Ron Wyden and Amy Klobuchar about vote by mail. Do you want to talk a little bit about vote by mail and why it's so important?
Sure. I mean, there is a very real fear that this virus will bounce back in the fall. That was what happened with H1N1. That's what happened with the 1918 flu pandemic. And if that is the case, people are not going to feel safe going to the polls. And because every polling place in America would violate the CDC guidelines on gathering. And it is just simply not possible. We cannot, America, under the best scenarios, is absolutely fucking miserable at administering elections. It is a national shame. So imagine what it would be like in the middle of a pandemic where I don't know when the last time you voted in person, but have you ever seen a poll worker who was not in the vulnerable population?
I know.
Usually they're senior citizens. There are almost always long lines, and the spaces are too small. And so what is the best things that we can do to ensure that people have the opportunity to participate in this election, to exercise their rights as citizens without exposing themselves to a potentially lethal virus? And the best answer is vote by mail. There are other things we can and should do just to fix our elections generally, but we saw what happened in some of these states on Tuesday, where the states that had vote by mail had turnout that seemed respectable, and the states that didn't had greatly diminished turnout. And so we need to do this. And Democrats have been pushing for vote by mail, where, just to give people who don't know, vote by mail is a fully vote by mail election like Oregon and Washington and what California is transitioning to. Every registered voter gets mailed a ballot. They fill it out, they send it back, and in most cases, it just simply needs to be postmarked by Election Day. And there's no reason we should not do that everywhere in the country. There's a piece of legislation co-sponsored by Amy Klobuchar and Ron Wyden that was introduced just yesterday that would mandate it, and it should absolutely be included in this bill. In my piece, I also lay out some of the very specific things we need to do to protect voters, even with vote by mail, against malevolent Republican election officials. The people can read more about that have been pushed by our friend Mark Elias, the legendary Democratic elections attorney. But I think it's very important that this be in this bill for the exact reasons that Brian talked about in his piece, which is we know this from 2009.
Yeah.
With every passing bill, the likelihood of another bill passing goes dramatically down. The Congress only has so much energy and political will. And if it's not, this is the train leaving the station. You better put it in this one because it's going to be exponentially harder the next time.
Yeah, I heard somewhere that they may sort of punt this to like a fourth relief bill after this third relief bill that they're discussing now, and they'll do election reform there. I really worry about that, and I worry about Mitch McConnell being willing to, dive into changing our elections for the better with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy and Donald Trump after we're through this relief package. I think the Democrats should be demanding it in this current package. And as Mark Elias points out in his Washington Post op-ed about this, as you should all read, is it's not very easy to do this. Like, we need to do it, but there's a number of steps, partly because states administer elections, and so it's hard to have sort of one national standard here. So, there's 16 states right now that require an excuse to vote by mail. And so the Wyden-Klobuchar bill would basically say, all right, every single state, there should be no excuse to vote by mail. You shouldn't have to have an excuse. But even that's not enough because, like you said, that doesn't get you to the point where the states are automatically mailing every single voter a postmarked ballot to send in. And so, that legislation also has $500 million that it would give to the states to sort of take some of these steps that are necessary. And part of those are, you got to provide the free postage, you got to mail the ballots, you got to make sure that the states accept ballots that are mailed on Election Day, because a lot of states that have no excuse vote by mail say that the ballot has to get there on Election Day. And you also have to get now more workers and more volunteers to count all those ballots that come in maybe a couple days after the election because they were postmarked on Election Day. So there is sort of a number of steps that every state has to take to get there, which means that this has to start happening now. This cannot be, if we wait till September or October, it's going to be too late to do this. And we have to prepare for the fact that by November, this thing may not be gone. And in all likelihood, it'll still be dangerous for at least a lot of vulnerable populations and older voters to go out and vote. And, you know, for Republicans that have often been resistant to things like vote by mail and making voting easier, they should think about the fact that most of their voters are older voters. So it's not obvious that vote by mail would benefit one party or the other, which I guess is the hope that maybe both parties would come together and make it happen.
That's right. In a normal world, higher turnout benefits Democrats for the most part. Not true everywhere, but that is generally true. And history has shown in states like Colorado, which adopted vote by mail, studies show that it also helps increase turnout dramatically in some cases among populations least likely to vote. But in this particular case, just you fucking yahoos who all yelled at me on Twitter when I tweeted about this saying, never let a crisis go to waste. Imagine what the electorate looks like if people over the age of 70 are afraid to go vote. Who do you think that hurts?
Right.
It's fucking armchair Twitter political strategists in the Republican Party. Who do you think that hurts? Like, you know, one of the people who tweeted at me about this was one of Mitch McConnell's aides. You fucking yahoo.
Oh, they are some of the worst fucking people in politics, like Josh.
Well,
Holmes
I mean,
and
look,
that
who
crew of
could
assholes.
not? I mean, look, who could?
Sorry.
Like, is there anything to better show the political genius in electing a Republican in Kentucky? Congratulations.
Just fucking gross. All right. Before we move on from Congress, should we talk about the fact that, and I know you want to talk about this, 2 members now have tested positive for COVID-19, Republican Mario Diaz-Balart of Florida and Democrat Ben McAdams of Utah. Why are members of Congress still going to work and not sort of practicing the same extreme social distancing that the rest of us when we are depending on them to be there to vote in person, when we are depending on them to pass this legislation that will save the economy, save democracy, et cetera? Like, why can't they figure out how to institute remote voting? Why are they all still huddled together in Washington and the Capitol and Capitol Hill offices, potentially exposing each other to this? I mean, it seems very scary and very stupid.
I really discovered this last night when I did I googled Congress and continuity of government plan, and it turns out there is none.
Ugh.
And there's a excellent story written a few weeks ago by Garrett Graff in Politico magazine, who first explored this after the mass shooting in which Steve Scalise was wounded, that Congress basically has no plan if a large portion of members were incapacitated or in some way or deceased through, some sort of, this was in the context of a mass shooting or terrorist act. And then he updated it about coronavirus. And then Paul Kane, who knows Congress as well as anyone, in the Washington Post is another story today, which is there is no plan for this. And Mitch McConnell was on the record in the story opposing the idea of mobile voting. Now, every member votes on the same machine. They all touch it, and then someone else touches it in the House. They are near each other. Cory Gardner is apparently self-quarantining after he came in contact with someone just after being at a lunch of Republican senators, which is essentially just a meeting of the vulnerable population. And this is very, very worrisome that you could be in a place where large portions of Congress are unavailable. Steve Scalise, who the leading Republican vote counter, is currently unavailable because he is self-quarantining. Yeah. And we need a plan that means that members can vote remotely. We needed this a long time ago, but it is not implausible that large portions of Congress will be unavailable to act at a time of national crisis unless we put in place an actual plan. It is insane, and I hope someone is working on it right now.
Yeah, get on that, someone. Probably a good idea. All right, let's talk about how the politics of Trump's response is playing out, which is something you also talk about in your piece. At some point earlier this week, after he read that report from Imperial College that more than 2 million Americans could die in this pandemic if nothing is done. Trump suddenly looked and sounded like he was taking this seriously, even if he's certainly not acting that way. And after one of his daily press conferences, CNN's Dana Bash said, quote, "If you look at the big picture, this was remarkable from the President of the United States. This is a nonpartisan. This is an important thing to note and to applaud from an American standpoint and from a human standpoint. He is being the kind of leader that people need, at least in tone, today and yesterday, in tone that people need and want and yearn for in times of crisis and uncertainty." Is it even worth yelling about this since we've been doing it since Trump started running for office in 2015 and now they are still doing this shit in the middle of a pandemic?
Look, there's nothing more infuriating than Trump being graded on a curve, in like the steepest curve in American history. But it's not going to be fixed.
Yeah.
It will never be fixed. And it's not everyone in the media, to be very clear, but it is the general conversation just gives Trump a participation trophy for completing sentences that would never be provided to any other president, most certainly a Democrat. And we have a choice. It is okay to yell about it. It is okay to tweet about it. But if it is another reminder that, in particular now, right now, that if the primary means by which we plan to convince the American people that Donald Trump is unfit for this office, is the least prepared person to be in charge during a pandemic, is someone who should be fired in November, if our primary means of doing that is through the mainstream media, we will fail at that task for a whole host of reasons we've been talking about for a long time. The media doesn't have the reach nor the cultural inclination to do our job. It is our job as Democrats to tell people that Trump is unfit. It is not the media's job. Sometimes people can get that impression from some very good journalism that happens, but they're going to report what he says, and they may fact check it minutes later, hours later, days later, but we have to be the ones who hold him accountable, and we're going to have to learn this lesson as a party eventually, or we're just going to perpetually live in this miserable timeline.
Yeah, and it does seem like because all that you just said is true about the media, that Trump's press strategy over the last week is benefiting him politically, partly because of sort of the institutional weakness of the media and how, as you point out, it's not their job, it's our job. But also, he gets to come out every day. He gets to dominate the airwaves. Everyone takes his press conference live, and he can just say whatever he wants. He can lie however he wants. He can exaggerate progress all he wants. He can offer a lot of happy talk. And, I could imagine it appearing to sort of the average American who is home, like everyone's home right now. Okay, well, this guy, maybe, he's been an asshole before. He lies. I don't know if I trust him, but he looks serious. He is just talking about a lot of progress. He's saying that everything's under control. Everything's going to be great. And so I do wonder, how do Democrats handle sort of Trump's press strategy right now, knowing that there is no bully pulpit as powerful as the presidency under any president?
So I'd say three things. One, Democrats have a tendency to, ourselves included, I am very guilty of this, to focus on the style and optics of Trump as opposed to the substance.
Yeah.
And, we see, like, he's up there, he's saying the wrong words, doesn't seem like he knows what he's doing, he's putting misspellings in his tweets. And we use that as evidence of unfitness for office. But people, for the vast majority of the electorate, Trump's style and language and demeanor is baked into the cake. It is not. They were aware of it when he was elected. They live with it. It is not going to be reason enough to meet the pretty high burden of firing a president after one term. And so I think in this case, we need to focus on the substance of what he has done wrong. Right, the very specific things that he failed for weeks to invoke the Defense Production Act to ensure that we have enough ventilators and respirators and masks, that he is responsible for the lack of testing, that he fired the pandemic unit, that he was briefed on multiple occasions about a pandemic and did nothing. We have to focus on the very specific, fact-based things that Trump did and didn't do that led to this crisis, and not the insane thing he said or tweeted that morning. So that's one. Two is we need to, Democratic groups, Democratic candidates need to tell the story themselves. And we can talk, there's a debate about this among some of our most valued and respected friends. But I think Democrats need to be advertising, because Trump, like if you were someone who consumes these press conferences and every news story like we do and a lot of our listeners do, it's pretty obvious what he has fucked up. If you're just someone who is trying to manage their life through this incredibly scary time and dealing with having kids at home and maybe working from home or worrying about if you're going to get another paycheck, and you're just sort of surfing the news, you see Trump at his podium making statement after statement after statement. It seems like he's doing something. And so if we want to tell people the truth, if we want to inform them about that Reuters story you read, we're going to have to pay to do that. And the third thing is we need more Democrats to get out there. And I think that involves our soon-to-be presumptive nominee in Joe Biden being out there as the public face of the Democratic response, talking about what Trump did wrong, what he would do differently as a president. The speech he gave last week before the debate was excellent, and we could use more of that. In my memo, I list a couple of things that he could do, but his presence and voice, he is the only Democrat right now with the bully pulpit. I'm sorry, he's the only Democrat right now who can get something in the neighborhood of the sort of press attention that Trump does. And if he is off the field, we are dramatically outgunned in the media space.
Yeah, I really agree with that last one, especially because I'm remembering in the 2008 crisis, obviously we were in a different place than Biden is right now because, Barack Obama was the nominee. It was September, October, November of 2008. And one of the things that benefited the Democrats then was Pelosi and other Democrats sort of stepped back and made sure that all of the messaging sort of went through Barack Obama. He was the leader of the party at that point, even though he wasn't president yet. And so, George Bush was doing what George Bush was doing, and Barack Obama was out there every day, criticizing both McCain and George Bush and sort of showing how he would act as president of the United States. And he was speaking on behalf of the Democratic Party, and he was offering the contrast. And one of the things you and I have been talking about for the last couple of years is it has been much harder in the Trump era for there to be one voice of the opposition and the Democratic Party because we didn't have a nominee yet. Well, now we're about to have a nominee, and I do think, and it's obviously there's a lot of challenges, right? Because there's not a campaign trail anymore, and we'll talk about all that, and there's not rallies, but I do think we have to hear not just statements, not just tweets. We must have to hear Joe Biden's voice almost every day during this crisis, not only as part of his campaign for presidency, but as to let Americans know what a Biden presidency would look like. So I think that's super important. We should.
Yeah, I want to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wanted to be completely fair to Team Biden.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's very easy for, podcasting wasn't a huge deal when we worked in the 08 campaign, but there were people like us who didn't have to deal with all the challenges of the campaign offering lots of advice. So to be fair to them, I think this is a very delicate part of the campaign. We'll talk about this, but they're trying to wind this down in a way that is appropriately they're trying to wind this down in a way that is appropriately respectful to Bernie Sanders and his supporters. They don't want to look presumptuous. They have a ton of work to do, and perhaps more work than any Democratic nominee in history, to put together a fully functioning general election campaign. He has been underfunded for a very long time now. He just hired a new campaign manager, the very excellent friend of ours, Jen O'Malley Dillon. And so no one's on vacation there. And you have to do all of this while your staff is working from home. So there are tremendous challenges. I just think sooner rather than later, it is important for the party generally, but for Biden particularly, is to be out there now, because the memory is short in the Trump era. And you have to strike when people are paying attention to a particular story if you want to burn it into their memory in a way that will still be relevant in November. And that moment is now.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with all of that. And I think that up until now, I totally understand where the Biden team has been and the different challenges they're facing, both in terms of challenges they'd be facing regardless of whether there was a pandemic, because of the fact that Bernie Sanders is still in the race, and also the added enormous challenge of organizing this kind of response during a pandemic when all of their staff are working from home and, their nominee can't be out on the trail. So I totally understand that. Let's go back to the ad debate, the debate over sort of Democrats sort of launching an ad blitz about this right now, because, as you alluded to, David Axelrod and David Plouffe, who are incredibly close, have worked together, we're partners and then partners on our campaign, have been friends for life, sort of got into it a little bit on Twitter, respectfully, about whether Democrats should run ads right now. And there was this Washington Post story about how Pacronym, which is Tara McGowan's organization, Tara's been on the pod before, and David Plouffe is helping out there too. You all know Plouffe. They're going to sort of launch some ads about Trump's response to the pandemic. And Axe sort of quote tweeted it and said, I don't know that this is the time for negative ads right now. There'll be a time at one point down the road, but I don't know if this is it. And, Plouffe said, I disagree. We basically have to do this. We can't just disarm because that Team Trump is going to be out there touting how wonderful he is every single day. What did you think about that debate?
Well, I know you and I both feel this way, and anyone who worked for Barack Obama does, is that there's no people that we have more respect for as people and as political strategists than Axe and Plouffe. And even when I was writing my book, I wrote some things that I knew Axe would disagree with, and it made it hard to write them, right? Because it's like he's one of the smartest people I've ever known and one of the best people I've ever worked with. And so the idea that he disagrees makes me deeply uncomfortable. And I think, just to be fair to Axe's point of view, that this was interpreted by some on Twitter to say that Axe was saying basically this is a time for unity behind Trump and we put politics aside.
Yeah, he wasn't
I do not believe
that.
that's what Axe.
No.
He was not saying that. He was making a case about the political wisdom of running political ads at a time when people are deeply afraid and deeply worried about the fate of the country. And so it's a disagreement in strategy. And I think what matters here, I agree with Plouffe in this, because I don't think we can let this opportunity pass itself by, and we can't let Trump use this to gain an advantage. We've seen Republicans use these opportunities where they have cowed Democrats from making their political case. Bush after 9/11, Democrats lined up behind him, helped give Bush a 90% approval rating, and then he used that 90% approval rating to bully America into a war and bludgeon Democrats by comparing them to Osama bin Laden. So we should be very cautious about that. But I think the tone of the ads matters a lot. Like if you were watching, what Pacronym was talking about are fact-based digital ads that share some of the information that we have talked about where Trump messed it up with a targeted set of voters via Facebook or other platforms, which is different than the sort of stereotypical negative television ads that you see with the ominous music and the blurred faces and all of that. Like if people were watching CNN to try to figure out how to protect their family against viruses. People were watching CNN to get the latest information about how to protect their families, and then all of a sudden was this commercial that was looked like a terrible negative ad, and then said paid for by the Democratic National Committee or Joe Biden for America or whatever else. I think Axe would be 100% right. I think the sorts of things that Plouffe and Pacronym are talking about are necessary and appropriate in this timeline, is my personal view. But this is a good faith disagreement, and I certainly Axe feeling differently always makes me question my own opinion.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think back to what Barack Obama always used to tell me when I'd go off to work on some speech, which is, you don't have to put a lot of spin on the ball when the facts are on our side. And to our conversation earlier when we talked about, Democrats don't need to be just focused on Trump's stylistic snafus, his crazy tweets, the things he says, all that kind of stuff, that, we'd probably be better off focusing on the substance of how he has fucked up this response and continues to fuck up this response. We'll be better off. I believe the same is true about any video we share, any ad that runs, anything like that. There is a mountain of evidence that Donald Trump has screwed up this response. And look, it's not just about gaining some political advantage in the narrow sense where we usually talk about it regarding campaigns, right? There is a substantive angle to this, which is we want the response to be better. We want to demand a better response to this so that people can live, so that our economy can go back to normal. And if all we have is Donald Trump at a podium lying and exaggerating and telling us everything is fine when it's not, there needs to be voices on the other side saying, hey, he's not telling you the truth. He's fucking this response up, and don't believe him, and we need to demand better because lives are at stake. livelihoods are at stake, and I think it's bigger than politics, and so I do think that like this is an age where we need to. Sorry, let me just try that again. In this media age, right, there is an imbalance between what Donald Trump can go out and say and what all of us can say in response. And so I think that having ads like this that, again, are measured and substantive, respectful of what Axe is worried about, which is that a lot of people are scared out there. And so I think you have to really be careful about the tone. But I think Pluff is right. We should not disarm here.
Just one other thing on this is my bias here is, I wrote about this in my book, but I believe that the only way to have a successful communication strategy in this media age is with a substantial digital advertising component.
Yeah.
And I think that is true now. That is true in the general election. And if Joe Biden is president, he should have an up and running campaign that is telling voters about what he is trying to do for the country from inauguration day through election day of his first term. And that is the only way to succeed in this world where there's like an on and off season for advertising is, I think, an outdated concept that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Dan, it was great talking to another human being besides Emily. Emily and I have just been talking to each other nonstop, and it's rare to be able to speak to someone else.
I mean, this is the most social interactions I've had in a week outside of my wife and my daughter.
Right.
So if there are any other podcasts out there looking for a guest, hit me up. I'm ready to talk.
And now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to play some of the many voice notes that you all left us. Thanks again for calling in, and please keep them coming.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm from Red Bank, New Jersey, and on March 9th, I was actually laid off from my job. Before, this really all hit the fan. And my company had given me 3 weeks severance, which is generous of them. And just 3 weeks is usually enough to find time to find another job. The problem is that I did have several interviews set up for this week and next week. And one is canceled. One is moved to a phone interview. And even then, they don't know when regular operations would start, so they don't know when I would be able to start if I was to be hired. It is immensely annoying and frustrating, to say the least. And everyone out here is suggesting me payroll tax, and that's not going to help me because I don't have an income right now. It just doesn't help me. And I don't know what I'm going to do with all my bills, because even if I was hired by someone, I wouldn't start, until probably well after April 1st. And I have bills to pay, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I really don't. I'm really stuck. So I hope that the government can do something to help me. I don't hold very much weight. I am very lucky in that I have friends and family that are willing to help me out and say they'll help me out if that comes to it. But I know that not everybody has that, and I really, really hope that we can all get our stuff together and just take this seriously. Okay. Well, thank you guys for listening, and I hope everyone stays safe out there.
Hi, my name is Ali, and I'm calling from Brooklyn. I have been sick since Monday, and actually called my urgent care. They urged me not to come in, but I defied them and visited the urgent care facility today. I was not given a COVID test. Even though I was showing some symptoms, they're only giving those tests to folks who have a fever, shortness of breath, and all of that. But here's the thing. My job requires me to interact with the public. And I believe that if we are showing some symptoms, we should be able to get the test. For some reason, what I'm hearing on the news from pundits, that's not translating into like real life situations. So there's a disconnect, obviously. I don't know who can help. I don't know who to call, but I just thought I'd share my story, my experience. Bye.
Hi, this is Megan. I'm from Missouri, and I work for a county health department here. We are actually one of the lowest funded county health departments in the state of Missouri. And on top of that, Missouri ranks 50th out of all the states on public health funding in the nation. We have a staff of about 35 people to serve a population of around 350,000. So prior to the outbreak, I, was working on things like vaping education with teens, some opioid crisis response grants, doing things like writing data briefs, and as of now, all of that work has been dropped to help our outbreak response team. There's only 5 people on that team, and so now the entire health department has been called in to help them deal with this and help our community get through this. So thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for taking these listener stories, and thanks for, all my coworkers and I listen to your podcast every week, and it makes our day better. So thank you.
Hey, Pod Save. I just wanted to give you guys a quick voice memo because you were asking about Corona stories, and I don't want to tell you where I'm from or my name, but I work for the United States Postal Service, and we were given a briefing this morning, and they've been behind every single day on the information from the CDC, from the Trump administration, from every other country. Basically, our briefing went this morning that the only way we could leave and use sick leave would be if we showed all 3 symptoms at the same time, which is incredibly laughable because from everything we've read, this goes in stages. It's also incredibly dangerous. I work in a station of 30 people. I am a regular carrier, so I have all the benefits, health insurance, union protections, X, Y, and Z, but we are not practicing social distancing. Carriers take breaks, they share food. Yesterday they were sharing donuts, today they were sharing celery sticks and ranch out of the same container. It's absolutely mind-boggling that they won't, practice this stuff. There's no hand sanitizer. There's no gloves. There's no mask. I bring my own gloves. I have been bringing my own gloves for as long as I've been a carrier, which has been 5 years. The hand soap that we have in the bathroom is like Christmas themed. Who knows how old that is? Things are not. They're not going well with the Postal Service. You can read reports from MIT and other places that talk about the ability of the virus to live on cardboard and plastics, and I'm currently delivering my route. The bag that is in my hand is made of plastics. I have no idea if the clerks protect themselves both in our station and in the plants themselves. I just want, you guys don't have to play this, but if you could get the message out that, we aren't prepared. The Postal Service is not prepared to deal with this. They're acting as if this is very, very minimal. That, yes, you might not be able to get it from your letters, but you can get it from your coworkers. You have no idea where your coworkers go after work. Here, bars and restaurants closed at 5. People left work and immediately ran out to a local establishment, local bar to get in drinks. And I understand that it was St. Patrick's Day, but it's not acceptable. So please get this out on, Pod Save America, Pod Save the World, something, because I have numerous customers who are elderly. They still don't take it seriously. They're listening to, Fox News and just coming out the door to try to grab the mail from me without practicing any sort of distancing. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to be off of work. But that's the reality we're living in. I'm, more prepared for this because of my military background. and I've taken it seriously from the jump, but we don't seem to be doing it at work. So thank you very much, and let's get through this together.
Hi, my name is Fiona, and I'm a senior at Williams College. A couple days ago, I was told that I would be forced to leave the place that I consider home and the place where I have my greatest support system as we transition to virtual learning. To lose closure around such an important time in my life has been emotionally devastating, to say the least. And I realize that this is a time in my life that I will never get back. I'm really grateful that I get to return to a family that accepts all parts of my identity, unlike many of my peers. However, as a low-income student, leaving campus means losing my work-study job, which was my only source of income between now and when I start my real adult job this summer. And I don't know where I'm going to get the money to rent my first apartment, which is really scary for me. But I wanted to thank everyone at Crooked Media for bringing me joy and stability through your podcasts in this difficult time for all of us. And I really appreciate all that you do. Bye.